Commander Story had been watching the stars for 30 years. His people, the Valaxians, had long heads and big brains that were good at seeing patterns. They could tell when a species would grow strong or when it would die out. Most species followed the same path. They would grow, become powerful, then slowly fade away. But humans were different. Story first noticed them when their ship called the New Horizon broke down in deep space. The ship was carrying 5,000 people to a new world. Something went wrong with the engines, and half the ship was dying. The metal was cracking, and deadly radiation was leaking everywhere. The ship's captain sent out a call for help. But help was too far away. The people on the ship had maybe 2 days before they all died. Most species would have done the smart thing. They would have moved everyone to the safe part of the ship and left the rest to die. It was the only way to save the most people. Story had seen it happen many times before, but the humans did something else. A young pilot named Jake Morrison volunteered to fly back to the broken part of the ship. His job was to bring people to safety. The first trip was dangerous but possible. The second trip was worse. By the third trip, space debris was flying everywhere like bullets. Story watched through his powerful telescope. He could see Morrison's small shuttle getting hit by chunks of metal. The shuttle's outer shell was cracking. Warning lights were flashing inside the cockpit. Morrison's commander told him to stop. The computer said he would probably die if he went back again. The chances of living through a fourth trip were less than 50%. Morrison looked at the numbers on his screen. Then he looked at the people still trapped on the dying ship. Among them were children, including his own daughter, Emma. "I'm going back," Morrison said into his radio. The fourth trip was a nightmare. Morrison's shuttle was barely holding together. The air inside was getting thin. The radiation was so strong that alarms were screaming constantly. He brought back 15 people. For the fifth trip, Morrison's shuttle was more broken than working. The hull had cracks that let in deadly space radiation. His life support system was failing. The other pilots begged him to stop. "There are still kids over there," Morrison said. That was all he said. The fifth trip brought back 12 more people, including 2 families with small children. Story ran the numbers through his computer. The chances of Morrison surviving a sixth trip were less than 20%. The shuttle would probably break apart completely. Even if it didn't, the radiation would kill Morrison within hours. Morrison knew this. The ship's computer had told him. His fellow pilots had told him. His own body was already sick from radiation poisoning. He went anyway. The sixth trip was slower. Morrison's hands were shaking from radiation sickness. His vision was blurry. Blood was coming from his nose. But he flew through the debris field one more time. He brought back 10 more people. When Morrison's shuttle landed, he could barely walk. The medics rushed him to the hospital bay. The doctors said he was dying. "How many people are still over there?" Morrison asked from his hospital bed. "Jake, you can't go back," the doctor said. "You'll die if you're exposed to any more radiation." "How many people?" Morrison asked again. 18, mostly children." Morrison tried to get up. The doctors had to hold him down. His body was shutting down from radiation poisoning, but he was still trying to save those children. "I have to go back," he said. "Those kids don't have anyone else." The other pilots made the decision for him. While Morrison was unconscious, they took his shuttle and went themselves. They brought back the last 18 people, including Morrison's daughter Emma. 3 of the rescue pilots died from radiation poisoning. Morrison lived, but his body was permanently damaged. He would never be the same again. Story studied Morrison's medical files. The human had known the risks before his fourth trip. The computer had clearly shown him that he would probably die. Morrison had looked at those numbers and decided they were acceptable. This was what disturbed Story. It wasn't just that. Morrison had been brave. Many species had brave individuals. It was that Morrison had made a mathematical calculation. He had weighed his own life against the lives of strangers and decided that saving the strangers was worth the risk. But it got worse. When Sci-Fi looked at the rescue records, he found something that made no sense. Morrison had not been ordered to make those trips. He had volunteered. No one had forced him to risk his life, even stranger, when the human news media reported the story. They didn't treat Morrison like a hero. They treated him like he had done something normal. The most common reaction was not amazement at his courage, but satisfaction that someone had done the right thing. Sci-Fi had observed thousands of species over 30 years. He had seen many acts of bravery, but he had never seen a species where risking death for strangers was considered normal behavior. He ran Morrison's psychological profile through his computers. The human showed no signs of mental illness. He was not suicidal. He was not seeking glory or fame. Morrison was a normal human being who had simply decided that other people's lives were more important than his own safety. This pattern appeared in Morrison's background too. As a child, he had once jumped into a frozen lake to save a drowning dog. As a teenager, he had run into a burning building to help an elderly neighbor. As a young adult, he had given up a good job to care for his sick mother. Each time Morrison had put himself at risk for others. Each time, he had acted like this was the obvious thing to do. Sci-Fi began studying other humans from the New Horizon rescue. He found the same pattern everywhere. The doctors who had treated radiation victims despite the risk to themselves. The engineers who had stayed at their posts to keep the ship's systems running. The parents who had given their own oxygen masks to their children. All of them had acted like their behavior was normal. None of them seemed to think they had done anything special. This was what haunted Sci-Fi. Not the individual acts of courage, but the realization that humans had built their entire civilization on the assumption that people would sacrifice for strangers. Their laws, their customs, their stories, all assumed that when faced with a choice between personal safety and helping others, people would choose to help. Sci-Fi had never seen anything like it. In his 30 years of observation, he had cataloged species that were stronger, smarter, and more advanced than humans. But he had never seen a species that considered dying for strangers to be normal behavior. He marked the human file as requiring continued observation. Something told him that Jake Morrison and the New Horizon rescue were just the beginning. 3 years after the New Horizon rescue, Sci-Fi received new orders. The Galactic Council wanted him to watch a war. Humans had settled on a planet called Kepler 442b. Now the Krillian Empire wanted that planet for themselves. The Krillians were known across the galaxy as perfect warriors. They had conquered 47 worlds in the past 100 years. Their soldiers were bigger and stronger than humans. Their weapons were more advanced. Their battle tactics had never failed. When the Krillians arrived at Kepler 442b, they brought 15,000 soldiers. The humans had only 800 people who could fight. Most of the human defenders were not even real soldiers. They were farmers, miners, and shop owners who had picked up guns to protect their homes. The human leader was Colonel Lisa Hayes. She had never been to military school. Before the war, she had been an engineer who dug mines and built roads. She knew nothing about fighting wars. Sci-Fi watched through his telescope as the Krillian ships landed. Their army was massive and well organized. They had tanks, flying vehicles, and weapons that could destroy entire buildings. The humans had old rifles and mining equipment. Every military computer in the galaxy said the same thing. The humans should surrender within 3 days. Fighting was pointless, but Colonel Hayes did something that made no sense to any military expert. Instead of keeping her small army together, she broke them into tiny groups. She sent these groups into the planet's cave systems that had been dug for mining. The Krillians laughed at this strategy. They thought the humans were running away like scared animals. They moved their army forward to capture the human towns and cities. That was when the real war began. The human group started attacking from the caves. They would jump out, shoot at Krillian supply trucks, then disappear back underground. They hit communication towers and destroyed fuel depots. They attacked small groups of Krillian soldiers who were separated from the main army. The Krillians had never faced this kind of fighting before. Their enemy was everywhere and nowhere. They would send 100 soldiers to guard a supply line. The humans would attack with 10 people, kill or wound as many Krillians as possible, then vanish into the caves before reinforcements arrived. Zexthery watched a young human named Danny Rodriguez during one of these attacks. Danny was only 19 years old. He had been a student before the war started. Now he was crawling through dark tunnels with explosives strapped to his back. Danny's job was to destroy a Krillian communication center. The mission required him to plant bombs under the building, set a timer, and escape before the explosion. It should have been simple, but something went wrong. Krillian soldiers discovered Danny before he could get away. They surrounded the building. Danny was trapped in the basement with the bombs. Through his radio, Danny called his commander. "I can't get out," he said. "They've got the building surrounded." "Leave the bombs and find another way out," his commander replied. "If I leave the bombs, they'll find them and disarm them. This communication center controls their whole northern sector. We have to take it out." "Danny, that's an order. Get out of there." Danny was quiet for a moment. Zexthery could see him through the building's walls using his advanced sensors. The young human was scared. His heart was beating fast. His hands were shaking. "I'm sorry, sir," Danny said, "but I'm going to finish the mission." Danny manually set off the explosives. The building collapsed, destroying the Krillian communication center and cutting off their northern forces from their command. Danny died in the explosion. Zexthery had seen many soldiers die in many wars, but he had never seen someone choose to die when they could have lived. Danny had not been forced to sacrifice himself. He could have escaped and tried again later. Instead, he had decided that completing his mission was more important than his own life. The war continued for 14 months. The Krillians adapted their tactics. They brought in poison gas to force the humans out of the caves. The humans responded by making breathing masks from mining equipment. When the Krillians sent special soldiers trained for underground fighting, the humans collapsed parts of the cave system, sometimes trapping their own people to stop the enemy. Zexthery watched Colonel Hayes make these terrible decisions. She would order sections of caves to be destroyed, knowing that some of her own people might be trapped inside. Each time, she would ask for volunteers to stay behind and set off the explosives. Each time, humans would volunteer. A miner named Carl Johnson volunteered to collapse a tunnel that would trap 30 Krillian soldiers. Carl knew he would not have time to escape after setting off the explosives. He did it anyway. A teacher named Marie Lopez volunteered for a mission to destroy a Krillian fuel depot. The mission required someone to drive a truck full of explosives into the middle of an enemy base. Marie knew it was a suicide mission. She did it anyway. A teenage boy named Tony Garcia volunteered to stay behind during a cave collapse. His job was to make sure the explosives went off at exactly the right time. Tony was 17 years old. He could have run away and let someone else do it. Instead, he stayed and completed the mission. Each time these humans acted like they were doing something normal. They did not cry or beg for mercy. They did not ask for rewards or recognition. They just did what needed to be done. The Krillians could not understand this behavior. Their own soldiers fought well when they had good chances of survival. But when faced with certain death, Krillian soldiers would surrender or retreat. This was logical behavior. This was what every species in the galaxy did. But humans kept fighting even when they knew they would die. They kept volunteering for missions that had no chance of success. They kept sacrificing themselves for their friends and neighbors. After 14 months, the Krillians gave up. They had lost over 7,000 soldiers to an enemy they could never catch. They had been defeated by humans who refused to act logically. It was the first time in galactic history that the Krillian Empire had been defeated by a smaller, weaker force. Sci-Fi studied the battle reports for months afterward. The humans had won not because they were better fighters, but because they were willing to die for each other. They had created a military force where every soldier was ready to sacrifice their life for the mission. This was not normal behavior. In 30 years of watching wars across the galaxy, Sci-Fi had never seen anything like it. Most species fought to survive. Humans fought to protect others, even if it meant they would not survive themselves. The victory at Kepler 442b made humans famous across the galaxy. But when Sci-Fi read human news reports about the war, he found something disturbing. The humans did not celebrate their victory by praising the people who had died. Instead, they seemed sad that anyone had needed to die at all. They built monuments to Danny Rodriguez, Carl Johnson, Marie Lopez, Tony Garcia, and all the others who had sacrificed themselves. But the monuments did not call them heroes. They called them ordinary people who had done what needed to be done. This was what haunted Sci-Fi. Humans had created a society where dying for strangers was considered ordinary behavior. They expected people to sacrifice themselves when necessary. And people did it without being forced or threatened. Sci-Fi marked the human file for continued observation. He was beginning to understand that humans were more dangerous than any military force in the galaxy. They were dangerous because they would never give up, never surrender, and never stop caring about others, even when caring about others meant they would die. 2 years after the war on Kepler 442b, Sci-Fi witnessed something that would change how he saw humans forever. It started with a distress call from a ship called the Prosperity. The Prosperity was a merchant vessel carrying 300 people. They were traveling to a new colony when something went terribly wrong. The ship's cargo bay had been carrying samples of an ancient disease. The container broke open, and the deadly sickness spread through the ship. This was not just any disease. It was something called a Class 9 biological weapon. An extinct alien race had created it long ago to kill their enemies. The disease had no cure. Everyone who caught it would die within 3 weeks. The Prosperity sent out emergency signals begging for help, but galactic law was clear about plague ships. Any vessel carrying a Class 9 disease had to be destroyed immediately. This was the only way to stop the sickness from spreading to other worlds. The galactic fleet was already moving toward the Prosperity with orders to blow it up. Admiral Korath, a military leader from the Centauri system, was in command. He had destroyed plague ships before. It was never pleasant, but it was necessary to protect billions of lives. Then the human medical ship Mercy arrived. The Mercy was commanded by Dr. Kate Sullivan, a woman who had spent her life helping sick people. She had 43 doctors, nurses, and medical technicians with her. When she heard about the Prosperity, she asked Admiral Korath for permission to try a rescue. "Dr. Sullivan," the Admiral said over the radio, "you know the rules. No one can board a Class 9 plague ship. The disease kills everyone who touches it. We have to destroy the ship before it reaches any populated worlds." "There are 300 people on that ship," Dr. Sullivan replied, "including 60 children. We have to try to save them. There is no cure for this disease. It has been studied for over 200 years. Every medical expert in the galaxy agrees that it cannot be treated. If you board that ship, you and your crew will die for nothing." Dr. Sullivan was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that Sci-Fi would never forget. "Then we'll have to figure out how to make impossible work. Admiral Korath ordered Dr. Sullivan to stay away from the plague ship. The human government sent messages telling her not to board the Prosperity. Medical experts from across the galaxy explained that she would only create more victims. Dr. Sullivan ignored them all. She gathered her crew and explained the situation. She told them that boarding the plague ship meant they would probably die. She said that anyone who wanted to leave could do so with no shame. No one would think less of them. Not one person left. Nurse Ben Carter was the first to speak up. "Doc, those people need help." "That's what we signed up for," Engineer Lucy Chun nodded. "If we don't try, who will?" Medical technician Ray Murphy added. "My kids would be ashamed of me if I walked away from sick children." One by one, all 43 crew members of the Mercy volunteered to board the plague ship. They knew they were probably going to die. They did it anyway. Zexthery watched through his sensors as the human medical team sealed themselves inside the Prosperity. The ship's air was full of the deadly disease. Just breathing meant they were infected. The humans got to work immediately. Dr. Sullivan set up a medical lab in the ship's dining room. Her team began studying the disease while also caring for the sick passengers. They worked around the clock, taking samples, running tests, and trying treatments that had never been attempted before. After 3 days, the first human medical worker showed symptoms. Nurse Sarah Kim began running a fever and coughing. By the end of the week, half the medical team was sick, but they kept working. Zexthery watched Dr. Sullivan continue her research even as the disease attacked her body. Her hands shook from fever, but she still prepared medicine. Her vision was blurry, but she still examined patients. When she became too weak to stand, she worked from a wheelchair. Engineer Lucy Chun was responsible for keeping the ship's systems running. The plague had damaged her nervous system, leaving her partially blind. But she continued to repair equipment by touch, memorizing the location of every wire and circuit. Ben Carter, the nurse, developed severe muscle weakness from the disease. He could barely walk, but he crawled from bed to bed, checking on patients and giving them medicine. When he became too weak to crawl, other sick crew members carried him. The passengers on the ship tried to help however they could. A teacher named Linda Brooks, who was dying from the plague, spent her last days reading stories to frighten children. A mechanic named Steve Adams used his remaining strength to help Lucy Chun repair the ship's air systems. Everyone was dying, but everyone kept trying to help others. On day 10, Dr. Sullivan made a breakthrough. She discovered that the disease attacked the body's immune system in a specific way. If she could slow down that attack, the body might be able to fight back. Working with the few crew members who were still healthy enough to help, Dr. Sullivan developed a treatment. It was not a cure, but it was something that might give people a chance to survive. The treatment was dangerous and painful. It required injecting patients with chemicals that were almost as deadly as the disease itself. Many patients might die from the treatment instead of the plague. Dr. Sullivan tested the treatment on herself first. If it was going to kill someone, she wanted it to be her, not one of the passengers. The treatment made her violently sick for 2 days. But on the 3rd day, her fever broke. Her strength began to return. The disease was still in her body, but her immune system was winning the fight. The medical team began giving the treatment to everyone on the ship. Some people were too sick to survive it. Others were helped by it. Of the 300 original passengers, 274 lived. Of the 43 medical crew members who had boarded the plague ship, only 19 survived. Dr. Sullivan was one of the survivors, but the disease had permanently damaged her lungs. She would never be completely healthy again. Ben Carter lost the use of his legs. Lucy Chun remained partially blind for the rest of her life. When rescue ships finally arrived, they found something that medical experts said was impossible. A Class 9 plague had been defeated. The treatment that Dr. Sullivan's team had developed became the basis for vaccines that would save millions of lives across the galaxy. The Galactic Medical Council offered Dr. Sullivan and her surviving crew members the highest honors in medicine. They were invited to ceremonies on dozens of worlds. Universities wanted to give them awards. Dr. Sullivan declined all of these honors. When reporters asked her why, she said, "We just did our jobs. Any doctor would have done the same thing." But Zexthery knew this was not true. In his 30 years of observation, he had seen many plague ships. He had watched dozens of species face the same choice that Dr. Sullivan had faced. Not one of them had ever voluntarily boarded a plague ship. The standard response was to follow galactic law. Destroy the ship and save the rest of the galaxy. It was logical, sensible, and safe. But humans had looked at 300 dying people and decided that logic was not enough. They had chosen to risk everything to save strangers, including children they had never met. What disturbed Zexthery most was not the rescue itself, but the reaction afterward. When human news media reported the story, they did not treat the medical team as heroes who had done something amazing. They treated them as people who had done what anyone would do. The most common comment from humans was not amazement at the crew's courage, but sadness that anyone had needed to die at all. THARI realized that humans had built their entire medical system on the assumption that doctors and nurses would risk their lives to save patients. They expected medical workers to expose themselves to deadly diseases if it meant helping others, and the medical workers did it without being forced or ordered. They did it because they believed it was the right thing to do. This was what haunted Zexthery. Humans had created a civilization where dying for strangers was not considered heroic or special. It was considered normal, expected behavior. He had never seen anything like it in 30 years of watching the galaxy. 6 months before Zexthery was supposed to retire, he encountered the final human incident that would change his understanding of the universe forever. It began with a simple research mission. The human ship Explorer was conducting deep space studies when they picked up an automated distress signal. The signal was old, very old. It had been broadcasting for over 200 years from a derelict ship floating in the void between stars. The ship belonged to the Ashaki, a species that had been extinct for centuries. Their entire civilization had been wiped out by a plague that spread too fast for them to stop. The galaxy had mourned their loss. The Ashaki had been peaceful people who created beautiful art and music. When the Explorer reached the derelict ship, they made an amazing discovery. The ship's computer was still working after all these years. It had been protecting a single survivor in a stasis pod. An Ashaki child had been sleeping in suspended animation for 200 years. Captain Ryan Murphy was the leader of the Explorer. He was a father himself with 2 young children back on Earth. When he saw the sleeping Ashaki child, he knew he had to try to save her, but there were serious problems. The stasis pod was failing. The ship's life support systems were breaking down. The child would die within hours if nothing was done. The biggest problem was that Ashaki bodies were completely different from human bodies. They breathed a different kind of air that was poisonous to humans. Their body temperature was much hotter than what humans could survive. The inside of their ship was like a deadly oven filled with toxic gas. Dr. Amanda Price, the Explorer's medical officer, studied the situation. She ran computer simulations and consulted with experts back on Earth. The conclusion was always the same. It was impossible to save the child. Any human who entered the Ashaki ship would die within minutes. The atmosphere will kill you in 15 minutes, Dr. Price told Captain Murphy. The heat will shut down your organs in 20 minutes. Even if you could somehow get the stasis pod out, we don't know how to keep the child alive. Ashaki biology is completely different from ours. Captain Murphy looked at the monitor showing the sleeping child. She was small, maybe 8 years old. When she went into stasis, She was the last living member of her entire species. So we just let her die? Captain Murphy asked. Ryan, I understand how you feel. But this isn't like rescuing humans. We don't have the medical knowledge to save her. And you'll die if you try. Captain Murphy was quiet for a long time. He thought about his own children back home. He thought about how he would feel if they were trapped and dying while someone who could help chose not to try. I have to do something. He said finally, you'll die for nothing. The child will probably die anyway, even if you manage to get her out. But she might live. That's enough. Dr. Price tried to change his mind. The other crew members tried to talk him out of it. They pointed out that he had responsibilities to his own family. They reminded him that his death would not guarantee the child's survival. Captain Murphy listened to all of their arguments. Then he put on an environmental suit and prepared to enter the alien ship. The suit was designed for short-term exposure to hostile environments. It had 30 minutes of air and basic protection against heat and toxic gases. But it was never meant to handle the extreme conditions inside the HFY ship. Zexthery watched through his sensors as Captain Murphy entered the alien vessel. The heat began attacking his suit's cooling system immediately. Warning alarms started going off. The toxic atmosphere began seeping through the suit's seals. Captain Murphy ignored the alarms and kept moving. He found the stasis pod in the ship's medical bay. The child inside looked peaceful, unaware that she was the last of her kind. Moving the stasis pod required connecting it to portable life support systems. This meant manually calibrating two completely different types of technology, while wearing thick gloves and breathing recycled air. Captain Murphy had to read alien writing and figure out controls that no human had ever seen before. The heat inside the ship was getting worse. Zexthery's sensors showed that Captain Murphy's body temperature was rising to dangerous levels. The man was sweating so much that his suit's systems could not keep up. 15 minutes after entering the ship, Captain Murphy's suit began failing. The cooling system shut down. The air purification system started malfunctioning. Toxic gases were leaking into his breathing supply, but Captain Murphy kept working. His hands were shaking from heat exhaustion. His vision was blurry from dehydration. Blood was coming from his nose as his body began shutting down. 20-5 minutes after entering the ship, Captain Murphy finished connecting the stasis pod to portable life support. He began the slow process of moving it to his own ship. The pod was heavy and awkward. Moving it required careful coordination between the alien life support systems and human technology. Captain Murphy's suit ran out of air with the stasis pod halfway between ships. He was breathing toxic alien atmosphere, but he kept moving. His lungs were burning. His skin was blistering from the heat. But he did not stop. He got the stasis pod safely aboard the Explorer with less than 3 minutes to spare before his body shut down completely. The ship's medical team rushed into the hospital bay while other crew members worked to keep the HFY child alive. Captain Murphy spent 4 days unconscious. The toxic atmosphere had damaged his lungs. The extreme heat had caused organ damage that would affect him for the rest of his life. When he finally woke up, the first thing he asked was whether the child had survived. She had. Dr. Price and her team had figured out how to adapt their medical equipment to keep the HFY child alive. It took weeks of careful work, but they managed to bring her out of stasis safely. The child's name was Kira. She was confused and scared when she woke up. The last thing she remembered was her parents putting her in the stasis pod as their world died around them. Now she was alone with strange creatures who looked nothing like her people, but the humans on the Explorer took care of her. They learned her language and taught her theirs. They studied HFY culture and helped her remember her people's customs. They became her new family. Kira eventually joined the Galactic Confederation as a cultural ambassador. She helped preserve HFY art and music for future generations. She lived a long, happy life and always spoke gratefully of the humans who had saved her. Captain Murphy recovered from his injuries, but he was never completely healthy again. The toxic exposure had permanently damaged his respiratory system. He could no longer serve on deep space missions. When reporters asked Captain Murphy why he had risked his life for an alien child, his answer was simple. She was a kid who needed help. What else was I supposed to do? This was what finally broke Zexthery's understanding of human nature. Captain Murphy had not saved Kira because she was important or valuable. He had not done it for fame or reward. He had risked everything to save her simply because she was a child who was going to die. Zexthery studied human reactions to the rescue. Once again, he found that most humans did not treat Captain Murphy as a hero. They treated him as someone who had done what any decent person would do. The most common response was not amazement at his courage, but satisfaction that the child had been saved. Zexthery realized this was the key to understanding humans. They had built their entire civilization on a simple idea. When someone needed help, you helped them. It did not matter if they were strangers. It did not matter if helping them put you at risk. It did not matter if they were a different species entirely. You helped because it was the right thing to do. This was not normal behavior. In 30 years of observation, Zexthery had never seen any other species act this way consistently. Most species helped their own kind and ignored everyone else. It was logical, safe, and sensible. But humans had decided that logic was not enough. They had chosen to care about everyone, even when caring meant suffering or dying. On the day of his retirement, Zexthery submitted his final report to the Galactic Council. His conclusion was simple and terrifying. Humans were the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Not because they were violent or aggressive, but because they refused to give up on anyone. They would fight impossible wars, attempt hopeless rescues, and sacrifice themselves for strangers without hesitation. They did these things not because they were forced to, but because they believed it was right. Zexthery recommended that the Galactic Confederation immediately offer full membership to humanity, not because humans were powerful or advanced, but because they had something that no other species possessed. They had hope. In a galaxy full of species that had learned to be careful and logical, humans had never learned to stop caring about others. They saw solutions where everyone else saw impossible problems. They found hope where others found only despair. The galaxy needed that kind of thinking. It needed species who believed that doing the right thing was more important than doing the safe thing. What humans did still haunted Zexthery, but he had come to understand that the galaxy needed to be haunted. It needed to remember that some things were more important than survival. Things like hope, compassion, and the simple belief that every life was worth saving, even when saving that life meant losing your own.